Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if I look a bit redder than usual, fishing trip. I had a long weekend fishing trip. It was pretty good. I'll probably write a report about it tomorrow, but had a good time. Hope your weekend was as good as mine. Well, let's get to it. Stories of the day and stories over the weekend. This one comes to you from Fox News. AOC fires back at Trump for agreeing with her. I'll call your bluff, Ocasio-Cortez says. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat, having any of President Trump's concurrence. In other words, she can't possibly have any of JT at AOC, man. I mean, that would just be against her religion if she actually had one. After the president cheekily tweeted over the weekend that he agrees with her assessment, there's a very real risk that he will win re-election in 2020, and suggested that's why Democrats use the impeachment card. The progressive firebrand cited their mutual New York connection in hitting back. Well, before I get into that part, let me just say that AOC, in case you didn't know, you already were scooped on this by none other than Al Green, representative congressman from the great state of Texas. No, not the Reverend Al Green from Memphis. I wish it were. But no, this Al Green called for the impeachment of the president a couple of years ago, and as recently as the beginning of this year, essentially said if we don't impeach 45, that he may in fact win. So this idea that the Democrats, one of the reasons they need to impeach the president is to prevent him from winning, is not new news. It's just news that AOC seems to be saying the same thing. But so she was scooped. Anyway, back to the article. Mr. President, according to Ocasio-Cortez, you're from Queens. You may fool the rest of the country, but I'll call your bluff any day of the week. Opening an impeachment inquiry is exactly what we must do when the president obstructs justice. She says, advises witness to ignore legal subpoenas and more. Bye, she tweeted, capping off with a hand-waving emoji. Hey, let me just ask you this, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, let me ask you a question. What was the purpose of the Mueller Report? I mean, one of them, I would say, is it was that, quote, insurance policy that Strzok and Page had when he said to her, his lover, his FBI lover, that we got an insurance policy if Trump wins. I firmly believe that was what led up to the Mueller investigation. That was the FBI, the top level people that were anti-Trumpers. That led to the Mueller investigation. But what was the purpose of it other than to obstruct the president, which seems to be the only real purpose and the only thing still going with it? Wasn't it supposed to be about finding Russian collusion, which it found none? And how can you obstruct justice? I keep asking this question and have not gotten a straight response from anyone. So if you're out there listening, you can explain this to me. I would greatly appreciate it. How can you obstruct justice of a crime that never happened? I still haven't figured that out. But in her first Sunday morning show appearance since she took office in January, Ocasio-Cortez had told ABC News John Karl, spelled with a K like Karl Marx, maybe that's just a coincidence, on this week, she says, I think that we have a very real risk of losing the presidency to Donald Trump if we do not have a presidential candidate that is fighting for true transformational change in the lives of working people in the United States. Transformational. You hear progressives say that all the time. I mean, Barack Obama literally campaigned on transforming America, did he not? Well, I've told you for a while that the translation of transforming America is to get rid of that pesky little old thing we call the Constitution, or what I say is even worse, ignoring it. But that's what she's talking about. Because make no mistake, none of what Ocasio-Cortez has proposed doing, this transformational change, as she said, none of it could happen under the U.S. Constitution, not if it were actually followed. Now, it could, of course, happen with a President Biden, maybe, and a Supreme Court packed by like Mayor Pete or something like that. If the Democrats get their way, yeah, it could happen, but it would be against the Constitution. There's really no argument about that. She went on to make the case for progressive 2020 presidential nominee, suggesting anything short of that runs the risk of Democrats losing to Trump. But hey, and we're going to talk about this more in just a minute, I thought that that's on the Democratic field already, according to the polls, right? I mean, Trump is getting beat by the janitor next door right now, right? According to the polls that favor the Democrats. More about that later. In an earlier interview, Ocasio-Cortez called an impeachment investigation a constitutional responsibility. Now, on this, I kind of agree with her. Now, hang on before you get crazy. Here's what I got to say. If they truly believe, as the president calls this, believe if people like Nancy Pelosi and Ocasio-Cortez actually believe that the president is guilty of colluding with Russia. In other words, he spent his whole life, childhood up to adulthood, working his way up to a billionaire, you know, the face of one of the most famous TV programs of all time, known worldwide, all of that. He did every bit of that, then ran for president and won and took office just so he could be the pocket puppet of Vladimir Putin. If you truly believe that Trump is a Manchurian candidate, then you should have impeached him yesterday, let alone today, because it is your constitutional duty if you really believe that fantasy. I don't think they believe it. Back to the article. That prompted Carl to press Ocasio-Cortez on reports that progressive Democrats are frustrated with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has resisted calls for impeachment process. Now, AOC mentions crimes. What high crimes? Please be specific. What high crimes? And if you want to chime in, if you're one of these snowflakes out there, or you're part of the resistance, not deplorable resistance or citizens for Trump, but of course, if you are members of that group and you feel some crazy way about this, please tell me and be specific. What high crimes and misdemeanors has President Trump actually committed? What has he even been accused of? Because the Mueller Report doesn't list any of them. But Ocasio-Cortez, not to be deterred, says, I think it's quite real. I believe that there's very real animus and desire, talking about the differences between the Pelosi wing and the AOC wing. Is there really separate wings? A desire to make sure that we are, talking about the Democrats, that they and we are holding the president accountable. Accountable for what? First of all, let me back up a minute. There is no difference between the Pelosi faction and the Ocasio-Cortez faction on the desire to actually impeach 45, get rid of Donald Trump by any means necessary. They want to. The only difference is that Pelosi is just putting her finger to the wind. I get this finger, I suppose, and basically just saying, I don't think we've driven the poll numbers of Trump down enough. He's got too many supporters, so it's not politically the right thing to do. See, it's not about facts. If it were about actual facts, then they would have no fear of, and not only no fear, they would feel a grave, responsible duty to the Constitution, as they say, to impeach 45. It's not about facts. It's about fiction, and it's about political realities. That's all this is in political power. But I want to say, when she says here, back to this article, when Ocasio, because I hear this a lot from the progressives, that the president needs to be held accountable. Accountable for what? His victory? Because that's the only crime, and it's a big one. It's a huge crime. It's the greatest crime in the history of presidential politics. And Donald Trump, make no mistake, and Billy Bob will tell you, and I'll tell you more about him in a minute, Donald Trump is 100% guilty of the greatest crime in the history of presidential politics. He won. That's it. That's all they need. The fact that he won, they can't get over it. They can't get past it. And they want to defeat Donald Trump even after the people voted for him. They are willing. They always talk about protecting democracy. They're willing to overturn democracy, a legitimate vote of the American people in this case, because of their hatred for Donald J. Trump. And by the way, Billy Bob, if you hadn't met Billy Bob Bass, he's my psychic sidekick. He keeps me straight here. We talk a lot off the air. I'm a fish whisperer. That's how crazy I am. My hat actually says "Make Fishing Great Again," if you hadn't figured that out. But Billy Bob Bass has a Twitter following. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. As Billy Bob would say, back to the article. A growing progressive anger also targeted former Vice President Joe Biden, who said earlier this month he would no longer support the Hyde Amendment, which he had backed for decades. Biden said the law makes a woman's right to an abortion dependent on... Well, Biden is backtracking all the time, man. I mean, if he wants to, for instance, if it comes down to him and Elizabeth Warren, well, he needs to get his own Indian name, because hers, of course, the president calls her Pocahontas. I affectionately call her Liawapa, because that's what she does all the time. She is, after all, the whitest woman in America. She has paperwork proving just that. But Biden, I think he needs an Indian name. So I'm always trying to help here at JMT. We here at JMT, me and Billy Bob, I would say that President, God forbid, pull my tongue out, that Joe Biden, who is running for president, his Indian name needs to be Windblower. Because not only does he blow a lot of wind, but he puts his finger to the wind and changes whichever way they're blowing. Joe Biden is I don't care, even if you're a Democrat and you like him, if you really admit it, if you're honest with yourself, Joe Biden represents everything that is wrong with American politics. And I'm not really even talking about his policies. They're wackadoodle enough. But this idea that basically you can just live your whole life as a U.S. Senator is just ridiculous on both sides of the aisle. So that's not unique to the Democrat Joe Biden. It's a travesty of our system, really. But we'll move on, man. Oh, let me just say something about this Hyde Amendment. I've talked about this before. And on this, I somewhat, in a sense, agree with Ocasio-Cortez about the Hyde Amendment. Probably different than her. But there's really no reason to support the Hyde Amendment. Now, you may be going, what do you mean? Well, of course, the Hyde Amendment says that no federal dollars can be, in other words, no taxpayer dollars can be spent on abortion. Sounds legitimate, sounds real. But the reality is the Hyde Amendment is not worth the paper it's written on. It would be if they actually enforced it by not funding abortion clinics such as Planned Parenthood. To me, I don't care what side of the abortion issue you're on. There is no business of taxpayer money going to abortion clinics. And make no mistake about it, it's just a clerical little movement there, but a accounting movement. Your taxpayer dollars are funding abortion at Planned Parenthood. Anyone who denies that is being either disingenuous or just absolutely an idiot, because there's no question about it. I've explained that many times. I'm not going to go into it right now, but we could later. Back to Ocasio-Cortez, what she said. It's not the 70s, talking about the Hyde Amendment. It's not the 70s anymore, in an email to backers on Saturday. Building support for repeal of the Hyde Amendment. Like I say, repealing the Hyde Amendment is kind of irrelevant. It's more symbolic because they're doing it anyway. They're funding abortion. This is 2019, she says, and none of our leaders should be willing to stand by a policy that disproportionately harms low-income Americans and people of color. We'll talk about that in just a second. She says, just to suit the interests of anti-choice zealots, that ends now. So if you are in defense of life begins at conception, or even to the extreme that you actually, believe it or not, in defense of once a baby's been born, you don't need to kill it before you make it comfortable, or comfortable before you make it kill it. Once it's born, it's born. If you actually believe that once a baby leaves the womb, that it has human rights and constitutional rights if it's born here in the United States of America, then you're a zealot. A zealot, man. That's how far we've come on this issue, that you believe that a baby actually born deserves the right to live, that you're a zealot, man. But so she says here that disproportionately harms low-income Americans and people of color. Well, let me just tell you, abortion, if you just look at the statistics, and these are not my facts, they're not my opinionated facts, they're just the facts, although they're true nonetheless. Abortion already does this. It already disproportionately harms low-income Americans and people of color. Planned Parenthood does more to harm people of color, these are my words, by the way, people of color, than any white supremacist group ever could. They talk about these white supremacist groups, and there's debate about what the strength of the KKK is and all that. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Planned Parenthood does more in the form of genocide than any white supremacist group could ever dream of. The only statistic there you really know to prove this is just look, and these are facts, just look them up. You could Google it, but Google is of the devil, I'm just saying. But in New York City for well over a decade now, I'm pretty sure, but certainly for years, New York City, more babies of color, and specifically African-American black babies, are aborted than are born every year right now. And you don't have to take my word for it, but on the Planned Parenthood was specifically built and targeted poor, low-income American neighborhoods from its outset. That has been their client base from the beginning. You talk about a core constituency, their core base of Planned Parenthood is to abort children of color and poverty disproportionately. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, that's just a fact. Anyway, we'll see how the feud goes on. We'll see the war between the president and AOC, and we'll keep you posted. And this is about these polls. I promise you about the poll. We've been hearing, I was gone all week. I was hearing about this late Friday before I left to go fishing, and Sunday morning when I came back, it was all about the polls and how President Trump is getting creamed in the polls, man. Biden, every Democrat and his brother is beating the president right now. New polls show Trump trailing Biden and 4 other Democrats, according to the AFP. A nationwide Fox News poll released Sunday shows President Donald Trump trailing former Vice President Joe Biden and no fewer than 4 other Democrats contenders in early campaigning for 2020 election begins to gain steam. And I saw this when I turned on the TV this morning. I put it on Morning Joe. And you may ask, why in the heck would you subject yourself to that? It's a public service. I do it so I watch programs or read articles so you don't have to, because I'm trying to save you from it. But Morning Schmo, man, they were in rare form today. They were absolutely giddy that the polls were showing that the president is being beat by everybody and his sister, so to speak. But, you know, based on the polls that have come out now, let me think about this a minute. You know, the president, he's going to be down in Florida tomorrow, and I'm going to be covering. I doubt I get a chance to meet him, but if I do, you know, maybe I should give the president a little bit of advice. He should just quit right now, right? He just quit. Then he's supposed to announce tomorrow, and we're going to live stream it, by the way. More about that in a little bit. But, you know, the president's supposed to announce that his official re-election kickoff tomorrow in Orlando. And we're going to be there. JMT's going to be there. But I'm thinking the president, man, if he's looking at these polls, maybe he should just announce that I've decided to hang it up, you know. I mean, based on previous polls, he never should have run, right? I mean, think about that. If the president was based his decision on polls, he shouldn't even be president right now. Hillary should have won 10 times over, right? I mean, she was literally a 98% chance of winning on the day of election polls. But something kind of happened, didn't it? So, you know, I don't think the president's going to quit right now. I think he's probably going to do just what he said and officially announce tomorrow night. I'm kind of looking forward to it. So, I don't know about all these polls. A separate survey about, let me back up too on something. There's this report out now that President Trump fired his pollsters because of the bad polling numbers. And I don't know if that's true or not, but if true, it wasn't anything to do with bad numbers. It was the fact that numbers were leaked by the firms and the people that he hired. Now, if they're going to leak your information, then you should fire them, right? Regardless of what the information is. Get rid of them. But a separate survey of battleground states by CBS poll, another poll, showed, and it's surely CBS is not biased, shows Democrats strongly favor Biden as the candidate most likely to beat Trump in the next year's election. So let's just save time and money right now, especially in the Democratic field side. Let's just crown Biden the heir apparent, the extension of the Obama administration, and let's just crown Joe Biden, at least in the Democratic field, so we don't have to go through all that, although I think it's going to be really entertaining in a couple of weeks in Miami, I think. But let's just crown Biden the heir apparent. And if you want to, hey, you know, we can just crown him president, right? I don't think so. The Fox poll showed Biden leading Trump by 49 to 39% among all registered voters nationwide. First of all, I'm not sure I believe that. Secondly, that's irrelevant. totally irrelevant because you don't run nationwide. There's not just one big nationwide vote. Contrary to what the Democrats would have you believe, our Constitution actually has a little thing called the Electoral College. And no, it's not free college, so don't try to sign up for it. But the Electoral College elects the president on a state-by-state basis because we're the United States of America. We're not just, we're one nation under God, not one nation under progressive rule. Thank God for that, at least for now. But so the nationwide polls, I don't put a lot of stock in them because at the end of the day, that's not how you win the election anyway. And they go on in this Sanders had nearly the same advantage over the president at 49% to 40%. So you really believe that right now that Bernie Sanders is leading the president by basically 10 points? You really believe that? If true, it is a scary day indeed. But, here's the thing. Trump derangement syndrome is so bad that the Dems might elect an old white guy. Think about that. The choice between Trump. They're so desperate to beat Trump, so suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, that they're just going to elect another, next one up, next old white guy. And if nothing else, maybe an old white gal, the whitest woman in America, Lia Walker, Elizabeth Warren. Holding edges of 1 or 2 points over Trump, Alabama within the poll. These are the other people in the field who are still beating Trump, by the way. Holding edges of 1 or 2 points over Trump, Alabama within the polls. 3-point margin of error were Senators Elizabeth Warren, Kamala, where's my Ganji? My dad ain't even proud of me, Harris, as well as Mayor Pete I'm sorry, man. It's hard for old salty dog to say it. Mayor Edge, something like that. South Bend, Indiana. So let me get this straight. You got people of color, although Elizabeth Warren has no color. She's the whitest woman in America, but Kamala Harris has color, some anyway. And Box Checker Pete. I call him that as well because Box Checker Pete, man, he checks every box there is. He's a better Christian than Pence, which is just amazing. If evangelical Christians, can't you see the light? Aren't you going to line up the vote for Mayor Pete over restoring the Trump-Pence White House? Yeah, I wouldn't bet on that. Back to the article. The president does not officially, and I talked about this, launch his re-election campaign until Tuesday, tomorrow, at a rally-style event in a huge arena in Orlando, Florida. So I'm going to be there. JMT is going to be there. I'm going to be representing Citizens for Trump. Thank you very much for that opportunity. And we will be there broadcasting live tomorrow. Facebook Live on Citizens for Trump. You can see it probably on my other sites later. But if you want to tune in to the broadcast, it's going to be on Citizens for Trump. I'm a little questioned and iffy about the times because what we plan to do, just to give you a general idea, we're going to go down there and we're going to live stream interviews with just a common Trump supporter and even some protesters if we happen to run into any of them. And we're going to live stream their reactions, their hopes, their expectations for President Trump. We may or may not actually live stream inside the event. I know the event itself is going to be live streamed. Maybe leading up to it we will. But we will do some additional live streaming after the event as reaction to President Trump's rally and announcement there tomorrow night. So check it out. Citizens for Trump tomorrow. If I had to speculate on the time, I think the rally starts at 8:30. So look for us maybe to start doing something between 6:30 and 7, something like that. Back to the article, a belief among Democratic voters that Biden is best positioned to defeat Trump in 2020 was cited by 3/4 of Democrats as a decisive factor in their support. So defeat of DJT is it, man. That's all that matters. That is everything. Well, I got a question for anybody who's considering voting for somebody other than Donald Trump. And answer this honestly. It goes back to, I think, to Reagan, but other presidents have probably said, and this, I'm saying 4 years. I know it hadn't been that way, but this is what you're going to be going into when you go to November ballot next year. Are you better off now than you were 4 years before?